Welcome in, everybody, to WFUV Sports' preview of the 2023 to 2024 season for the New York Knickerbockers of the NBA. I'm Kris Pursiainen, alongside Colin Loughran, here to bring you perspective from the Knicks beat. We are going to be your two main Knicks beat reporters for this 2024 season, running it back from the dynamic duo that we were last year. And this year, a goal of ours was to have more special reports for you guys, for the listeners, for the fans of the team. So wanted to start off real simple, but real important with a season preview. Colin, I'm going to open it up by asking you how the NBA offseason was to you. I feel like people, you ask how your summer was. This is a basketball show. What did you think of the basketball happenings this summer? We got to talk about this stacked Eastern Conference at some point and how these Knicks line up within it.
Well, before I get to my thoughts on the East as a whole, Kris, there's no one I'd rather be running it back with on this Knicks beat than you, my friend, last year. Such a blast. Looking forward to what's in store this season.
Absolutely.
With that being said, the NBA offseason, always a chaotic time. This past summer, medium rare in my mind. Definitely some chaotic storylines going on. A lot of it happened at the last minute. The Damian Lillard stuff really shook up the Eastern Conference. Dame, now a Milwaukee Buck. Drew Holiday, a Boston Celtic. Kristaps Porzingis, a Boston Celtic as well. Really, that entire East framework has changed dramatically in a way that might help the Knicks. It also might hurt them at the same time, if that's possible. So a lot of ramifications for the New York basketball team. Excited to get to all of that. But really, the offseason never disappoints. This one, perhaps a little bit calmer than in years past. Of course, 2 summers ago, we had the entire Kevin Durant storyline. This year, a little bit different in that perspective, but never a dull moment, if we're being honest.
Absolutely. I mean, Bradley Beal going out to Phoenix as well. Chris Paul, now Steph Curry's running mate or backup. Definitely a very interesting NBA offseason, and one that, in my opinion, leaves the Knicks in a similar position that they were in last year, which I thought was a very good position. 47-35 last season, 5th in the Eastern Conference, 11th in the league in points per game. Thibodeau, the defensive-minded coach, had a team out there playing offense that had a real offense. What happened in the playoffs was that the offense fell flat. The isolation didn't seem sustainable, and Eric Spoelstra said verbatim they threw everything they had at Jalen Brunson, resulted in a 46-point performance from him in an elimination game where the rest of his teammates didn't step up, and the New York Knicks went home. I say all this to say that despite all of these happenings, the Knicks remain in the position they were in last season, a team that is currently top 5 to 6 in regards to talent on the roster in the Eastern Conference, while simultaneously being probably a top 3 team in the league in regards to assets and desirability as a franchise going forward. You talk about Oklahoma City and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren, Josh Giddey, Jalen Williams, the abundance of draft picks they have. You talk about whether it's a Sacramento with the picks they've stocked up and the current talent they have, whether it's a New Orleans with the abundance of picks they have, and a Williamson and an Ingram and these other players. New York slots in with Quickly, with Grimes, Barrett, Brunson, Randle, kind of the 3-headed snake of the offense, but Brunson and Randle, the 2 all-star caliber players, Robinson, the anchor down low, Grimes, Quickly, McBride even, the promising young core, and again, surplus first-round draft picks. So the Knicks are not only one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference in regards to how good they are today, but they're one of the best set-up teams in the league going forward. As a result, you and I have talked about this, Colin, the Knicks do kind of get discussed more as a team through the lens of what they can be, what they will be, as opposed to what they are now. I want to focus on that second lens with you right now, talking about these Knicks right now. What do you think we'll be saying about this team come mid-season, come year's end? What kind of team is this going to be, Colin? Because I think Thibodeau is a known quantity, but you upgrade the player who by most of the statistics was the worst out of the 9-man rotation to someone who served as a key piece of the Bucks championship run a few years back, and Donte DiVincenzo also on the Warriors. He's played on a lot of teams that provide a winning context. How do you see this Knicks team identifying themselves on the court this year?
Well, as far as the addition of DiVincenzo goes, I thought it was a brilliant ad for the Knicks because they needed three-point shooting. You mentioned the series against Miami and even portions of the series against Cleveland. It became clear that playing isolation basketball on offense wasn't going to be a long-term winning strategy precisely because they don't have the personnel that can play that way. You don't have a Kyrie Irving type point guard who can kind of weave his way through.
Brunson creates space out of nothing. The thing to me is he's surrounded by the shooting in that starting lineup with a Barrett, Randle, Robinson, 3, 4, 5 for those driving kicks to be sustainable. You know,
For sure.
Yeah.
Brunson can definitely weave and bob with the best of them towards the paint. My concern would be, unlike a Kyrie, the handles are not quite the same in that if you're an opposing defense and you choose to lock in on Brunson, you can lock him down, and then it's a matter of can a Julius Randle or an R.J. Barrett, as you alluded to, make those jump shots to kind of keep the Knicks even keel. The addition of DiVincenzo adds another shooting element to this roster. Holistically, though, you're right. When people talk about this Knicks team, they often refer to the future and about how you could add an Embiid. You could add a Greek freak when that was a possibility on the table.
Yep.
You could add a Devin Booker. But with all the change that's happened in the East, and to me, the Bucks and the Celtics are the primary culprits of this, of course, that's going to be a lot of chemistry to sort out for those clubs, right? That doesn't happen overnight necessarily. I don't care how much talent you have. Sometimes you're just going to have a difficult time trying to get guys to play together and be on the same page. I don't think I've ever said this over the course of my life. The New York Knicks might have the most continuity in the Eastern Conference right now. That doesn't mean they're the best team in the East. It just means they've been consistent over the last couple of years, and they have a core that knows how to work together. Starts with Randle and Brunson, leaks over into that Villanova aspect with Josh Hart and now DiVincenzo. There's a lot to like about this team. They're going to be able to play together. I'd expect the defense to be much better than it was last year, and it wasn't bad last year by any stretch of the imagination. I think year two, these guys will know each other's strengths and weaknesses just a little bit more, and we've talked about it before. Adding DiVincenzo adds a little bit of defense on the perimeter that can turn good defense into better offense, and that's going to be something the Knicks will need this year.
Yeah, that was, one of the Knicks' two primary weaknesses last season was defensive playmaking. Not just defensive ability, defensive talent. I'm talking about defensive disruption. If you want to look at football, the Knicks had a lot of, they don't throw to that corner because they don't want to test him. The Knicks had a lot of, when that corner was targeted, the receiver didn't catch a ball. The Knicks didn't have a lot of pass breakups. They didn't have a lot of deflections, and they definitely did not have many interceptions or forced fumbles. That is not something that this Knicks defense is conducive to, mainly, in my opinion, because of Thibodeau's conservative philosophy, both offensively and defensively, regarding turnovers. Offensively, he wants to limit them. Do not turn the ball over. He may hate that more than anything in sports besides the concept of losing. Defensively, it's don't gamble for steals, for turnovers. Don't gamble and screw the play because you tried to stop it early. The thing is, DiVincenzo is an incredible betting man, and I think Thibodeau is going to allow him to gamble. I think his shot diet on offense is going to be natural for him. He spoke at Media Day about not hitting the 40% threshold last season because of how many shots he took off the dribble and how many shots he took that were moving. The Knicks create a lot of standstill open corner threes. He will be knocking those down, so can you get a 40% three-point season from one of DiVincenzo or Grimes? I think you can get it from one of those two. That's better shooting than the Knicks had last year. Last year, the Knicks relied on Josh Hart for a clutch three in the playoffs in that game one against Cleveland, right? So, game two. So, it's tough for me to say that DiVincenzo wasn't a perfect signing. The reason I'm erring on that side of caution is because of the size.
Fair.
You want to judge Boston for putting all their stock into Horford and Porzingis and having O'Shea Brissett and Luke Cornett to back those two up. You got to talk about the Knicks having Julius Randle recovering from a surgery, Mitchell Robinson, who's been prone to injury in the past, having Isaiah Hartenstein as the backup 5, but the backup 4 is, well, they waived Isaiah Roby, so it's definitely Jericho Sims. that means they're not going to play one. That means the backup 4 spot in the rotation is going to be technically Josh Hart. Now, last year we saw the Knicks struggle a lot with Barrett-Hart lineups because of the fact that Robinson or Hartenstein would be out there. There would be inadequate shooting. I think this year, having the Grimes or DiVincenzo aspect, like you were saying, will allow that to shake up a little bit. Quickly and DiVincenzo as the bench backcourt, well, both of those guys play well with Brunson. Both of those guys play well with Randle. Both of those guys work with Barrett. So I do think the Knicks are doing a good job of folding in their roster with itself, understanding that, yes, Barrett gets run with the second unit. So let's get someone in the second unit who can shoot. Like they're just these moves they're making make sense. Hartenstein, last year, the signing felt like the first signing that they had made of a big man that considered R.J. Barrett and Julius Randle's preferred area to work in on the court. Jalen Brunson, too. He likes that paint. So this Knicks team now is getting a little less eager to jump on talent upgrades, a little more eager to jump on fit upgrades. And that's why I think despite the return for an Obi Toppin being weak and 2 second-round picks, you do have to think about this DiVincenzo move as not one that happened in a vacuum, right? They didn't send out Obi Toppin and receive DiVincenzo and 2 second-round picks. They got Josh Hart to opt in to his deal and then extend later in the summer, basically telling him, trust us, we'll pay you, so that they could get his college teammate on board. If you ask Hart and DiVincenzo, they didn't know that this was going to happen. Hart just happened to want someone else on the roster, and DiVincenzo didn't know this was happening. Those two were very intelligent at Media Day about avoiding exposing the team to more tampering charges. I can tell you that that's not how that went down. DiVincenzo was being courted in New York City by Jalen Green the week before he signed with the Knicks to go to the Rockets. This is someone who had interest around the NBA from some different teams that wanted to pay him. And the New York Knicks got him on a 4-year, $50 million deal. Colin, I couldn't agree more with your assessment of what he addresses on this team. In my opinion, it's the team's 2 biggest weaknesses.
Additionally, we talk about Hart, DiVincenzo, the Villanova aspect of this club. I also kind of want to touch on the guys who were here before any of this era, if we can call it that, of Knicks basketball happened. Primarily Grimes, Barrett, and Quickly. They were here 2 seasons ago when the Knicks
Barrett and Robinson
struggled.
are the 2 vets at this point to this organization, which is crazy.
And Mitch has really impressed me in the last year and change. He's not perfect by any stretch. The free throw shooting drives me nuts, but defensively, he's a pretty solid anchor down there. He's still growing into his role. I think there's times where I'd like him to be a little bit more aggressive. I know with him, it's either he's getting into foul trouble early or he's not playing aggressive enough, and it's kind of pick your poison at that point. I think he'll eventually find a happy medium. But in terms of Grimes, Quickly, Barrett, I think this season largely depends on what you're going to get out of those guys. You kind of know what Jalen Brunson's bringing to the table. It's possible he finds another gear. And if he does, which a lot of people think
there are people within
will.
the Knicks organization itself that think that he has another gear to hit, that think that jump in his three-point shooting will show itself in regards to attempts per game. And you'll see those 27-point games he has really quickly become 34-point games because a couple more of those shots were from beyond the arc.
And if that happens, I think we're having a different conversation about this team because essentially, if Brunson's able to upgrade his level of play,
they're ready to compete.
That opens up possibilities for other guys, too, on this roster. You look at an R.J. Barrett who had some really good playoff games last year, in my opinion, because of Brunson's presence. It just opens up pathways for other guys to play really well. But to really stay home on the point of these 3 guys I'm looking at, if Quickly, Grimes, and Barrett can elevate just a little bit and become more consistent, and Quickly, to me, is the prime example. He runs hot and cold offensively, very dynamic player. But when you have a dynamic talent, you're going to have to accept a dynamic downside every once in a while. There's times where he kind of just chucks up a ball.
Dynamic range of outcomes.
Exactly. If he can kind of hone it in just a little bit, because I love the defensive intensity. I like the shot most of the time. I don't love his shot selection all the time. But
that's
clearly he's one of the Knicks that's going to have to help them 3-point wise. If he can do that and hone it in, this team can go places. And you look at a guy like Grimes, who was very impressive last year in terms of closeouts and other metrics that people love to talk about in terms of these next-gen kind of stats.
Yeah.
If he can continue to do that, then we're having a different conversation. To me, this team is about, we're having one conversation now, but if certain guys can elevate their game just a little bit, you're not asking for leaps and bounds, just a touch, then we're having all new types of talks about, could you take on a team like Philly in the playoffs? Could you take on a team
I think
like
they're
Milwaukee?
there right now. I think with Philadelphia.
Assuming Harden's there, it's a conversation.
Philadelphia, Atlanta, Cleveland,
Miami
are the kinds of teams I think this Knicks team is currently as good as. Boston and Milwaukee.
Different story.
Are where it's a different story. Now, the thing with New York is they have paths internally, internal development, to get closer to that kind of team. They have paths in regards to the salaries they have to move to get closer to that kind of team. They have paths in regards to those surplus draft assets we were talking about to become that kind of team. They seem to be on their way. A question remains. Let's check on my phone right now. We have about 3 days before Emmanuel Quickley's deadline to sign that extension with the New York Knicks. Colin, I'm not going to ask you if you think a deal gets done. I'm going to give you a much easier question.
Fair.
That does not require you putting on X-ray goggles here in the basement of Keating Hall and trying to read the mind of Emmanuel Quickley's manager and agent. What would you give him if you were the New York Knicks? I think some numbers that have been thrown out there seem reasonable. And I've kind of landed on my 4-year number that I would go as high as. Where are you at?
What is your number?
Over
Give me
4
something
years.
to base it off of.
Over 4 years, I've seen a lot of 85 over 4. I've seen a lot of 115. I've seen a lot of 490. The highest I would go over 4 is 94. I would go 494 if I were New York.
490 seems closer to what I would try and give him. Not because I don't think Quickley is a tremendous asset, but at this point
You have to weigh
career,
the market. Look at what Reeves just got.
At this point in his career, he is an asset, right? In terms of what he could bring in from other teams and what he brings for the Knicks uniquely. I have questions about his development going forward. If for some reason there is internal rumblings that he's already reached his ceiling, which I doubt that this is his ceiling, but if they think that he's nearing
He's
it,
one of those guys that's just putting it together.
fair.
He said he had his first career triple-double against the Orlando Magic late in the season. You know, it was one of those games where he got to run wild. Not last year, but
that's
the year
just
before.
the point. He has a tendency to do that.
And he said, I've never been a good enough passer to have a triple-double before. And that's why my first triple-double came at the NBA level. Because I couldn't have done it at Kentucky, but I'm a better passer now. I couldn't have done it as a point guard in high school, but I'm a better passer now. This is a kid who's just putting it all together. And I asked him at Media Day what he was doing at the NBPA business meetings in Milan. He said brand awareness, brand management, just always soaking stuff up. He said he was a sponge, asking a bunch of questions. This is someone who loves to learn, who loves to get better, who loves the gym. I can tell you, I've heard when he's in the Bahamas, it's camps for kids that are underprivileged in the area, followed by workouts, followed by some sort of like management class out there, followed by more workouts, then maybe pool and PlayStation to end the day, right? Like it's very work oriented,
regimented.
Yes, and I think that if you're New York, you think he's the kind of player that you're willing to place some of those chips on. So I hear you with the 490. I think it's an amount you give him. Top 3 for Sixth Man of the Year last year. Fantastic player on both ends of the court. Could argue he's currently a top 75 to 80 NBA player, which I think is a really fair range for him. And that's a guy who you should want to keep around, especially when he matches up so well with a Brunson, with a Randle. Right before Brunson got here, there was one player on the Knicks who could get Randle going. It was Emmanuel Quickley. Before Brunson got here, there was one player on the Knicks who had a 2-man rating with Randle that was positive. Everyone else, their 2-man rating with Randle on the court, negative. Quickley and Randle, positive. Quickley works with all of these Knicks guys that are part of the core So I would keep him as part of the core. And if you want to, in a year, say, hey, okay, we traded for Joel Embiid. Let's take the Fournier salary and I guess Quickly's deal still wouldn't have kicked in. So you can do the Fournier salary, Quickly, and a draft pick for an OG Anunoby and say, okay, Anunoby would fit with Grimes better with Embiid, around Embiid. Brunson and Embiid with Grimes and Anunoby as the complementary guys sounds pretty good. Maybe you move Quickly down the line. But this Knicks front office loves years of control. Extended Randle to 4 years. Signed Barrett to 4 years. Extended him. Signed Brunson to a 4-year deal. Fournier to a 4-year deal with a team option. Burks, 3 years team option. Walker, 2-year team option. Noel, 3-year team option. They love years of control. I would give Quickly 4. I think he wouldn't mind 5 if the paycheck is huge. I would go 4, a little more money, keep it $494, and just keep him in the building. Do what you want in a year when that deal is eligible to be traded. Talk to me about, I'm gonna pivot you a little bit here instead of having you respond directly. Talk to me a little bit about not only Quickly, but the rest of the team in the playoffs against Cleveland and Miami, what they can take away from those matchups, those experiences, the win against Cleveland, the loss to Miami. What did you see not only from Quickly, I think he serves as a good soapbox though, but from the team in general, Colin, playoff takeaways for you that they can apply to this season?
My biggest takeaway from the playoffs pertains to a player that I have been high on for a while. You know this. I've been a vehement Julius Randle defender.
Mm-hmm.
I still am.
He's needed it in this market thus far.
Playoff performance aside, I still think Julius Randle can be a huge part of a potential Knicks championship run. I don't feel he's a number 1 option on a championship team. But could he be a 2, a quasi 3? Absolutely. And I think in terms of value, what he brings to the Knicks during the regular season was dramatically different than what he brought to them during the postseason, primarily because there were times against Cleveland and more so Miami, which he did deal with some injuries, some nagging injuries here and there series.
He was not healthy. He was pretty dinged up against Miami, and he still turned in a good game against them. Not saying that should be the bar for all NBA, but
which no one wants to give him credit for, by the way, which I pointed out numerous times, the fact that if Randle had sat, he wouldn't have heard the end of it. If Randle plays and plays poorly,
where people complain about load management more than ever, the guy who has made all NBA twice in 3 years because of how many games he plays, because of the consistency of his production, seems to get none of the flip side of the coin. You know, it's like heads and heads.
And it's for that reason that I choose to single out Randle, because Quickly clearly had his down moments in the playoffs, but to that point, it's not as if anyone expected Quickly to carry the team in the same way that Knicks fans might have hoped Randle would be able to do. I just don't know why he gets as much flack as he does. Obviously, I understand the playoff performance, but it's very hard to replace a guy that gives you 25 points a night, 10 rebounds a night, and 3 to 4 assists a night. And a lot of people say that that's just, a stat sheet stuffer. It doesn't actually mean anything. No, he brings value, because when you have a guard now like Brunson, who's going to be able to run this offense eloquently,
Randle can attack the weak side.
A guy like Randle is going to be wide open.
He's not initiating anymore. He's not dribbling and spinning into the paint anymore.
And did you notice how relaxed he looked towards the end of this summer and as camp really got going? It seemed a little different. It was definitely different than 2 years ago.
Veteran.
Hmm? Now he's aging into what he's going to be, which, let's be honest, the expectations for Julius Randle were through the roof when he came into the NBA, which is something that's not spoken about enough. Whereas now I think he understands who he is. He understands what he brings to the table. More than that, I think he's comfortable in that locker room. He's very comfortable with his teammates. For all of the media-created storylines about how he's a bad influence on his teammates, I've never heard in all the games I've covered anyone say a poor word about Julius Randle.
The thing is, I don't know if I'll agree there. I think I have, but I will say that the outbursts that he has on the court that are addressed by fans as unacceptable are talked about by the players as like, hey, at least someone cares. The outburst, that answer he gave about Miami wanting it more than them last season, there's context behind that. That came about 3 or 4 minutes after Obi Toppin had a screaming match with Tom Thibodeau over not playing him in that game. So Randle comes out after hearing a teammate go, me. We lost because you didn't play me. And Randle comes out and he says they wanted it more than us. They're focused on winning. We're focused on why we're losing.
And that might not be a popular take
No,
necessarily, but you need to have
authenticity.
that voice.
Listen, Colin, you talk about Randle's veteran leadership. How far that's come from where he was when he got to New York. Needing leadership, needing guidance on how to handle the biggest paycheck of his life in the biggest city he'd ever lived in. Besides, L.A. with Kobe was a pretty star-studded place to start out. You talk about a Brunson, steady. Thibodeau, steady. There's a common denominator here, right? The Knicks aren't supposed to be flashy over the top. They're just supposed to be a good basketball team. And I think they'll achieve that this season. I think they'll be a good basketball team. Let's talk about Las Vegas to wrap up here. 44.5. That's your number. That's your over-under. Over from a book of choice out west. Over or under 44.5 wins for these New York Knicks, Colin?
I'm comfortable with the over.
I'm comfortable with the over as well.
I think even the teams that will give them a hard time, such as a Milwaukee or a Boston, are beatable early in the year, especially first game of the Garden against the Celtics. I could very easily see the Knicks winning that, if for no other reason than Boston's still going to be figuring out the kinks in their rotation, figuring out how to pair these guys.
I think they win over 55 games. I think Boston wins like 54. Milwaukee gets like 60. Milwaukee, I think, just puts on a show.
You're in on the Bucks train.
People are saying the Bucks will be the better playoff team, but the Celtics will like run through the regular season. And I think the Bucks run through the regular season and the Celtics show their stuff in the playoffs.
I look at the East right now, and you see it the same way. It's kind of that two-horse race. That series is such a toss-up. I
see Boston and Milwaukee, and then behind them, close, but behind them, I see New York, Cleveland,
Philly,
Miami.
I'm high on Philly, even without Harden, because I think Tyrese Maxey is another level.
That's where I disagree, and we'll have to pod about this going forward. I love Maxey. I had him 7th on my board that year. I'm not there with him. For me personally, with the Knicks, I'm going to go over 44.5, 49 and 33 is my final record prediction. You'll put that on the paper for before this season, barring injury, of course. 49 and 33 is what I've got. I think this is a Knicks team that's going to have a strong season, but not bend over backwards to overachieve. Just they're going to do them, and that's going to be good enough because they're a good team and they're set up going forward. Colin, this is going to be one heck of a season to cover. Hopefully the team returns to the playoffs and we get more playoff basketball to bring coverage of to our wonderful listeners and viewers at home. But for now, that's going to do it for us as we are done wrapping up this preview of the 2024 New York Knicks. We want to thank you for joining us. Make sure you subscribe to WFUV Sports' YouTube. Make sure you stay tuned in to Pick and Pod, WFUV Sports' basketball podcast. And also follow Colin on Twitter and follow myself on Twitter. Stay tuned into our beat reports throughout the season as we cover these New York Knickerbockers and their 2024 campaign, not only towards Larry O'Brien, but this year for the first time towards a potential in-season championship. So lots of storylines to follow, potentially some all-stars in New York this season. We'll have you covered here at WFUV Sports. Stay tuned. For Colin Loughran, I'm Kris Pursiainen, thanking you for tuning in and hoping to see you soon.